Yeah, a little more. I don't see this one though. Great, thank you. I did. Some people were very eager to move back to Pilch. Yeah. It'll feel familiar to come back to this room, but it's also I've also gotten really used to davening daily minyan there. It's a nice big space, pretty. Yeah, July is this week. July is now. Week from today, right? Hi, Gary. Shabbat shalom. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Hi, Faith.
Nope. Nope.
Nope. What? I don't think anything is unbreakable, but they're fixed. How about that? Someone, a homeless person across the street last year started throwing rocks across La Cienega, and some of them hit the windows and shattered them. I know. I know. I know. It's serious. Yeah. We weren't. Very serious. Yeah. Ifa Minyan Shalano. Should I walk back to Alan Weinstock and his party on his lawn? Correct. Yeah. Hi, Tybal. Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi.
Shabbos. Javelin. Javelin. Yeah. Yeah. Let me see if I can see someone left. whole series of trucks parked right outside Los Angeles, like a convention or something. But why they're over here? This is where they can all line up and park peacefully without any problem. Outside of the hill, right? That's just my guess. I mean, they're doing a lot to interrupt Beverly Hills right now on Wilshire. Yes, but if you could try to park by the park, right? Yeah. Maybe right. There's a big muffler. They were starting to cut them. Protest what? Robertson Boulevard. Problem is, those are eucalyptus trees, and they are incredibly invasive. The worst possible trees that you could ever use for an area right there. Whatever they are, the eucalyptus or whatever it is, they are incredibly invasive trees, which upends everything and snags in the pipes that are below. You can't do anything with them, and if you leave them in place, it wrecks out the entire buildings that are there. If you're going to replace them, though, you need to replace them with trees, I would call palm trees that don't provide any shade, but something that will eventually provide shade. That would be the logical thing. It's tricky. It's hard when you take out old trees. If they are truly, that's the people who like it when it's beauty to one side. The other side is it's damaging all of the buildings, and we're paying all this money in repairs rather than roofs that are radiant and we can't use it for any business purpose. Zoomers, we're waiting for 2. That's why we're paused. If we don't get 2 in 2 minutes, we'll start Mincha without a minyan, and then we'll see what happens. But sorry for the delay. I won't delay the end of Shabbat. We'll begin in 1 minute, Rosa. Hope that you stay. Correct. Okay, so we're gonna start with Mincha. That's on page 214 in the Lev Shalem. We don't have a minyan, so we're gonna jump around to the parts that don't require minyan. I'll move this around so I can be on that side. (214) the Lev Shalem. Ashrei Ashrei Beitecha Hojalu Chasela Ashrei Am Shekach Lo Ashrei Am Sharonai Elohav Tila L'David Ramim Cholim
תהילת אדוני דבר פיו, יברא כל בשר, שם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברכיה, יתעביר עולם, הללויה, ובעל ציון גואל. ואתה קדוש יושב צילו ישראל בקר זה ויאמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבא כל הארץ כבודו מקבלים דמים ותישאני רוח ואשמע אחרי כל רעש גדול ברוך אדוני ממקומו ונתולדנה רוחה שמית בתרי כזי יסגן ישב כמימים רכי קרבה אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד למלכותי קיים לעולם ועד Adonai Sfarim Manam Iskavlana Wekov Salat Sershan Devatak Bachana Shem Elohim Yom Koreinu Baruch Adonai Shabaranu Lichodo B'Halaminatum Laman Yizam Rechacha V'Lo Yidom Adonai Elohai Lamadech ויבטחו בחיידי שמך, כי לא עזרת דרשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ויאדיר. Rosemary, were you going to be reading Torah?
Yes.
Do you want to come and just read from the Chumash?
You don't need to, because we're doing it a little bit kind of
just informally, not ritually. So we're going to at least have particularly because we're going to be looking at these during the Torah reading, we're going to read the verses from the first Aliyah of Chukat. In the Eitz Chaim Chumash, it's page 880. If you're following from a different Chumash at home, it's Bamidbar, Book of Numbers, chapter 19. And you could just read it all the way through, rather than pausing at the places you would put. I mean, till the end, yeah. Okay.
You don't say any baracha, no? וידבר אדוני אל משה ואל אהרון לאמור, זאת חוקת התורה אשר ציווה אדוני לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ויקחו אליך פרה אדומה תמימה אשר אין בה מום אשר לא עלה עליה עול ונתתם אותה אל אלעזר הכהן והוציא אותה אל מחוץ למחנה ושחט אותה לפניו ולקח אלעזר הכהן מדמה באצבעו והיזה אל נוכח פני אוהל מועד מדמה 7 פעמים ושרף את הפרה לעיניו את אורה ואת בשרה ואת דמה על פרשה ישרוף ולקח הכהן עץ ארז ואזוב ושני תולעת והשליך אל תוך שרפת הפרה וכיבס בגדיו הכהן ורחץ בשרו במים ועתה יבוא אל המחנה וטמא הכהן עד הערב והשורף אותה יכבס בגדיו במים ורחץ בשרו במים וטמא עד הערב ואסף איש טהור את אפר הפרה והניח מחוץ למחנה במקום טהור והייתה לעדת בני ישראל למשמרת למי נידה חטאתי וכיבס האוסף את אפר הפרה את בגדיו וטמא עד הערב והיזה לבני ישראל ולגר הגר בתוכם לחוקת עולם, הנוגע באמת לכל נפש אדם, וטמא 7 ימים, הוא התחטא בו ביום השלישי, וביום השביעי יטהר, ואם לא יתחטא ביום השלישי, וביום השביעי לא יטהר. כל הנוגח באמת בנפש האדם אשר ימות ולא יתחטא, את משכן אדוני טימא, ונכרתה הנפש ההיא מישראל, כי מי נידה לא זורק עליו, טמא יהיה או טומאתו בו. זאת התורה, אדם כי ימות באוהל, כל הבא אל האוהל וכל אשר באוהל יטמא 7 ימים, וכל כלי פתוח אשר אין צמיד פתיל עליו טמא הוא, וכל אשר ייגע על פני השדה בחלל חרב או במת או בעצם אדם או בקבר, יטמא 7 ימים. ולקחו לטמא מעפר שרפת החטאת, ונתן עליו מים חיים אל כלי.
Shakoch, Rosemary. We still lack a minion, so we'll go to the. The minion. Okay. Okay, so let's get a talit. Okay, so we turn to 222. Please rise for the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadav Yigadav Shmei Rabba Yamadi Rachu Teva Michma Teva Chayachon Avim Machon Chaydacho Beis Rabba Glavizman Kari Vimru Amen Yehi Shmei Ram Vorach Le'olam Me'amaya Yiparach V'ishtabach V'yitparchum Avina Say V'tadav V'talav V'talash V'nu Kodashah Brichu Lanu Kol Brachata V'shir Ataz V'tav V'nechmata Damiran Be'alma V'yimeru Amen. The quiet Amigdad begins with a whisper on page 223 in the Lev Shalem. You're still davening Amidah. Please continue with your own pace. We continue repetition 223. Please remain standing through Kedusha on 225. Adonai Sfatai Tiftach Fi Yagid Tilatecha Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Eloheinu Abraham Lo Yitzchak Lo Yaakov Elagdol Agibor V'Yanora Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Konekol V'Zocher Chastei Avod Mevi Goel Livnei V'Nehen L'man Shmo V'Yava Melech Ozer Mashiach Magen Baruch Ata Adonai Magen Abraham Tagibor Le'Lam Adonai Mechem Eitim Atarav Lo Shia Merida Tam L'Chalkel Chaim V'Chesed Mechem Eitim Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Rapech Holim Matir Asurim Mekayem U'Menatoli Shenei Hafar Michamacha Bagorod Midom Melech Melech Meimitum Chayim Matzmiach Yeshua Ben Amanatah L'Chayot Meitim Baruch Ata Adonai Mechayei HaMeitim Kedeshum Habalam Keshen Shumat Dishim Bato Bishmeim Arav Hedu Yadim Yach V'Kara Zeh El Zeh V'Yamar Kadosh 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 Adonai Yitzvav Moch La'aretz Kavadol Matam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Adonai Min Kamod Derei Kodesh Katu Lemor Eloch Adonai Leolam Elohai Etzion Lador Vador Hallelujah Lador Vador Nagid Golecha Ulenetach Netzachim Kedushatcha Nagdish V'Shivchacha Eloheinu Nipino Lemush Leolam V'ed Kimelech Gadol V'Kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Hayela Kadosh Atacha V'Shimcha Echad Umikam Chayishel Goy Echad Ba'aretz Tiferet Gedula V'Eter Yeshua Yom Menucha Kedusha Lamcha Natata Avraham Yagel Yitzchak Yiranein Yaakov Anav Yanuchu Bo Menuchat Ahava Undava Menuchat Emet V'Emunah Menuchat Shalom V'Shava V'Ashket V'Betach Menuchat Shleima She'atar Otzeba Yakiru V'Anecha V'Eidu Ki Minchai Menuchatam Yamnuchatam Yagdishu Et Shemecha Eloheinu v'levoteinu, v'tzev nuchatenu, kadshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'techalkem b'toratecha, saveinu mituvecha, v'samchenu b'shuatecha, v'taher libeinu, l'abducha b'yemet, v'anchilenu Eloheinu b'avar v'atzon shabbat kodshecha, v'enuchuva Yisrael m'kadeshei shemecha, baruch ata Adonai, m'kadesh ha'shabbat, v'etzeh Adonai Eloheinu, v'mchai Yisrael v'gdolatam, v'yashev v'avodeh v'betecha, v'yishei Yisrael tfilotam, v'vadu b'el ratzon, til ratzon tamid, avodah Yisrael amecha, v'techazena Einenu Mishukal Tzion Berachamim Baruch Ata Adonai Hamachazir Shechinato Letzion Modim Ani Fotech V'Tavotech Shbachol Leit Erev Avoka B'Tzorayim Tavkalo Racham Racham Rachim Kilo Tamo Chasadecha Me'olam Kivinu Lach V'Yal Kulam Yiparach V'Dram Shem Chamal Kino Tamili Lam B'Ed V'Chol Lachem Yidu Chasel V'Elu Et Shem Chavimet Yishuatenu V'Ezratenu Sela Baruch Ata Adonai Hatov Shmucha Ulachana Ela Hodod Shalom Rav Al Yisrael Chatasim Leolam Kitam Melech Adom Lechol HaShalom B'Tov Beinecha Levarech Adam Chai Shabbat Chol Yidem Chashav B'Shlomecha Baruch Ata Adonai Havarech Et Amo Yisrael B'Shalom. Top of 230 in the left Shalem. Tzidkarcha tzedek leolam, v'torcha emet. Tzidkarcha Elohim ad marom asher asik dolad Elohim yichamocha. Tzidkarcha kare'el mishpatechet tohom rabba. Adam ubehema toshia Adonai. Yigadav yigadash mirabba. Yimad yivrachateva milchotev chayachona v'mechon v'chedecho beisav v'galav v'zman kariv yimru amein. Yehesh meram vorach. Leolam ne'al me'al maya. Yibarach v'ishtabach v'yitparjam v'nasev. V'david lev t'lash v'negudasha richu. V'lam v'gom v'chatav v'shiratav. V'trav dechmata demiran v'yamav yimru amein. Tikabel tzavdon about Hondo Choshel Kadam Honi V'Shmaya V'Imru Amein Yehesh Lan Ramin Shemaya V'Chaim Olen V'Koshel V'Imru Amein Oseh Shalom Ramah V'Yateh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amein. We rise for Aleinu L'Shabeach Ladon HaKol Latei Kedula Liyotzeh V'Reshit V'Chol Nichu Ish B'Chem Kakatuba Toratech Adonai Melech Lelam Eben Emar Vayadonai Lamelech Kol Haaretz Bayomahu Yadonai Echad Ushemo Echad mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal, v'yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, v'yalmad, yirach, yiruteh, v'yamlich, malchuteh, v'chayechon, v'yomechon, v'chayei, dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala, v'zman kari, v'imru, amen. Yehei, Shemei Rabbah, m'vorach, le'elam, ne'almei maya. Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar, v'yit'aleh, v'yithalal, Shemei Kudusha, Brechu. Leila, min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom ramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Those who are in the room, come get some dinner for Sudash Lishit. Those who are on Zoom, get some food or anything else you'd like. We'll start the teaching in about 6 or 7 minutes. We're delighted to have you with us. Judy, how are you? Yeah.
That right-handed, go right-handed, his right-handed, but I write with my left hand, so I have lower dexterity there. I fell asleep for 3 hours. I'm gonna come get to sleep tonight.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I was going to do an El Male today, but I have till Monday. Yeah, I'm on my way till Monday. That was my Sunday. I might have something else. Well, mine don't give it. Never really. The more you give it, it's like years. I can't figure out how to get the more food there is for gear, the more gear there will be. That's why. There we go. That's why I sold my building. I have 6 units built in right here. Last month I sold it. I cannot take it anymore. After 46 years, I was tired of the tenants. Did you improve the house? Yeah.
Hi, Sandra. Shabbat shalom. The what? What are their names? don't think I know them.
Not yet.
Not yet. I look forward to it.
So I know that we grew up together. I
Mm.
grew up in Rochester. And so I was telling them about the bathrooms, but you can come use the bathroom.
The kosher bathrooms.
Right.
Hi, David.
Rabbi,
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. I couldn't get on Zoom before because the web link isn't working. I
Oh,
had to go to the email link.
I wonder why
So,
that is. Okay.
yeah, I have no idea, but I'm on now. So, and I have I couldn't get on Zoom before. I have your site for Mariv. I'll just say Kaddish by myself.
Well, David, stay and we'll have Kaddish for Mariv.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
I will, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And I see a screen that says Joy Peskin, so welcome. And I see a screen that says Heidi Rosen. Welcome. I don't know if that's the Heidi Rosen that I know. There's a Heidi Rosen that I know. I don't know if that's which Heidi Rosen that is, but welcome. Okay, we're gonna get started. The text sheet was went out in the Shabbat email, so hopefully those of you who are doing this by Zoom have access to that. Does everyone in the room have one? Okay, let's jump right into this. This is going to be a legalistic shiur, but hopefully underneath it are some interesting questions about how we balance the push towards a lenient ruling, which makes it easy for people to observe, and the push for a values-based understanding of Jewish law, right? So when we're deciding Jewish law, are we just actually trying to figure out what is or is not the permitted approach to something, or are there also values that are coursing through that should inform or at least are created when the law gets put in place and followed? So we're starting with some of the verses that Rosemary read before. The opening part of Parshat Chukat talks about the laws of what happens when you have had contact with a corpse. In biblical law, when you had that much contact with someone who had died, it rendered you tameh. I've said this many times. I'm going to say it again. Tameh does not mean bad. It just means that it puts you in a state of ritual distance, and in order to come back to holy things, you have to go through a purifying process. It doesn't mean pure and impure the way we use it in English as bad and good, but rather distanced from the holy. Chapter 19, verse 11. If you have contact with the deceased of any nefesh, I know in modern Hebrew we use nefesh to mean soul, and biblical Hebrew meant body. For the body of any Adam, any person, Adam is the most ecumenical way of referencing a human being in biblical Hebrew. V'tamei shivat yamim. You enter this period of tumah for 7 days. Hu yidchata bo. Interesting, actually, the root chet, which means sin, it also can also mean to cleanse from an impurity. Interesting enough. So you have to go through that process. Bayom hashlishi on the 3rd day, uvayom hashvi on the 7th day, yitar. V'im lo yidchata bayom hashlishi. If you have not done the process on the 3rd day and the 7th day, lo yitar, it doesn't work. Zot haTorah Adam kiemut ba'ohel. This indeed is the law. Remember, in the Torah, the word Torah does not mean Torah. In the Torah, the word Torah means ruling or teaching, instruction. This is the instruction of a person who perishes in a tent. Kol haba el ha'ohel v'chol asher ba'ohel yitma shivat yamim. This is a new rule. Earlier on, it said that if you actually have physical contact with the deceased, then you are in this category of Tameh. Now we're learning that even if you share a tented space, right? And this is actually very significant in modern Jewish law, particularly for someone who's a Kohen. For someone who's a Kohen, it takes it very seriously that they should not be anywhere near someone who has died, lest the Mashiach come tomorrow. I'm not sticking here, and the Kohen's service is needed. Therefore, you'll see Kohanim not come into cemeteries, and if they come into cemeteries, they'll stay on pathways and make sure they were never in a space where both they and someone who's died is covered by the same cover, right? So this is another stringency, or not a stringency, another way in which we understand that not even physical contact, but three-dimensional spatial contact with someone who has died renders you tameh. Okay, that's enough for that text. Any just questions on the meaning? Yes, Rosemary? Oh, let's get a microphone going around. 1 second, everyone. One sec.
Just by reading it, I was just thinking there are jobs like people who clean the dead or wash and dress them up.
Right.
So these people are impure all their life.
Right. So you're talking about someone who's on a chevra kadisha, right, and who is doing the very, very, very important mitzvah of bringing someone to burial. It's not that they are impure their entire lives, but every time they do one, they can't do another one for quite a while. Or if they do another one, it distances how long they can return. And it doesn't mean that they're not living a normal life. It means that they can't come into the sanctuary to offer a sacrifice, right? It means that they have distance from certain ritual places in Jewish life, but not that they're diminished in any way. We might say that they are psychologically and emotionally drained. I like thinking of tameh and tahor through those prisms, right? It's not about clean or unclean. It's that if you have that much direct content with someone who has lost their life, it's hard for your own life force not to be sapped on some level, even if you might feel elevated by having done something so holy. So if you're on the Chevra Kadisha, and remember the Chevra Kadisha is a much later notion than these biblical rules. It's hard to imagine how it was done back then, but ostensibly, yes, you became Tameh, and then you could no longer access the certain parts of ritual life until you had gone through the third day and seventh day.
So they can never pray in the morning or in the evening.
No, they can pray. You can pray when you're
I mean,
Tameh.
in the group.
You
to
can
be
pray
a
as
part
a
of
group.
Minyan.
No, you can pray as a minyan, which you
Oh,
can't. And let's not. We're dancing in anachronisms because the notion of praying in a minyan is post temple, right? And the notion of going from being tameh to tahor in order to participate in temple life is pre-temple. So they didn't really overlap. But if we go back, I don't know, to the year 500 BCE, right, when the temple still stood. Well, that actually is a bad example because the temple was destroyed at that point. But during temple times, yeah, when all these laws were still in place, and we did not have the concept of davening in a minyan, if you were tameh because of this, it meant that you were tameh, and there were certain things that you couldn't do, but it didn't mean that you couldn't participate in community or be with your family. Yes, Bob. Let's get Bob the microphone.
You know, in the first couple phrases, you explained some of the Hebrew. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it at all. You went pretty fast.
Okay.
For my understanding. So, what are some of the? Is there?
Well,
what were you explaining? There are like a few words here that you said are this and they're not that, and they're this and they're that.
The tameh and tahor, which are often translated to English as impure and pure, I think those English translations give a sense of the word that were not intended by the Torah. I think tameh and tahor really mean life ebbing versus life flowing. And that when you come into contact with someone whose life is ebbed completely, it has a life ebbing impact on you. And before you can come back into holiness, you have to go through a process. In English, those words denote something positive and negative. I don't think that's what the Torah meant by it. Go to the next source, okay? So this is not from Parshat Chukat. This is a narrative towards the end of Bamidbar after the war with the Midianites. There's a lot of verses here. We'll go through this a little bit quickly because it's really to draw out one narrative detail. If you're following from home, it's Numbers chapter 31, but we're going to skip around a bit in the chapter. By the Adonai Moshe Lemor, God said to Moses, saying, Nakom nikmat b'nei Israel, avenge the Israelites for their war with Midian, me'et hamidanim, achar te'asef elamecha. Meaning, Moshe, go to war, and afterwards you can come back to your people. Skip to verse 6. Vayishlach otam Moshe elef lamateh. Moses sent 1,000 from each tribe, latzava, to make an army. Otam and Viet Pinchas ben Elazar Kohen latzava. Pinchas, the one that we know from Parshat Pinchas, was the leader of this campaign. Uchlei hakodesh v'chatzotzot ha'tshua b'yado, and he had sacred utensils and he had shofars to rouse the troops. Verse 7, vayitzba'u. This is the verb form of the noun sava, which means a host or an army. They encamped al Mijan, or they engaged with warfare against the Midianites. Kasher tzivad Adonai Moshe, God has commanded. Vayahargu kol zachar. They killed a lot of men. In fact, all the men. Skip to verse 13. I mean, it's right there, but if you're from home, skip to verse 13. Vayetzu Moshe ve'Elazar kohen v'chol nesei ha'ida likratam el mechutz lamachaneh. When the war was over and the troops are coming back, Moses, Elazar, and all of the princes come out to greet the returning soldiers. Now, the soldiers have done what while they're out there? Which means they've come into contact with whom? Dead bodies, which means that their ritual status is ostensibly tameh. They haven't done anything wrong. I mean, we're not having a moral conversation right here. It may be that they did something wrong, but they did what God asked them to do. In warfare, you kill people. If you kill someone, you're hand in hand and probably, tented with someone who's died, which means when you come back, you might be celebrated as heroes for winning the war, but ritually speaking, you are tameh, and therefore you need to have a certain quarantine outside the camp. That's what it says. Vatem chanu michutz lamachaneh. They said, all of you, well done on the war, but camp outside the camp, shivat yamim, 7 days. Why? Kol horeg nefesh, v'chol nogeh bechalal. Anyone who killed someone, and killing someone back then was not with a machine gun, it was hand to hand. V'chol nogeh bechalal. Anyone who touched a corpse, tidchateu, you've got to go through this process, exactly as Parshat Chukat said. On the third day and the seventh day, you and all of the people who you captured. Verse 48, so it skips to the end of the chapter. All of the commanders approached, the commanders of the thousands and the hundreds. Verse 49, Moshe, they said to Moses, Abadecha nas'u et rosh anshe hamilchama. We checked all of our troops, the Israelite troops, asher biadenu, that is in our hands. Velo nifkad mimenu ish. Not one of them is unaccounted for. Meaning, what miracle happened during this war? Which person died? No Israelite died. What is the halachic significance? Halachic is an anachronistic term here. What's the legal significance of the Torah saying that all of the dead people who were dead in this situation were not Jewish? It means that the verses that say that a corpse defiles means any corpse. There's nothing jingoistic about this, right? We're not saying that if you have come into contact with a Jewish or an Israelite corpse, therefore you go into that status, but that a non-Jewish corpse is somehow lesser. It's a stringent law, but it's a stringent law that elevates the humanity of all people. I know that's a weird thing to say, right? Let's say the Torah had said, since nobody of the Israelites had died, and all the dead people are just non-Jews, all those laws from Parshat Chukah don't apply because we're really only talking about the sanctity of a Jewish Israelite corpse. It's not what it says. So the straight understanding from the Torah that says that any person who has died, because of the sanctity of that body, confers tum'ah, that sense of life ebbing force, upon a person who touches it. And that is pretty much understood to be the case through Mishnaic law as well. Turn to source 3. This is the Mishnah Ohalot, an entire tractate dealing with tents, right? Not how to put them up like you're camping, but the law specifically of how Tumah is transmitted through a tent. In the 18th chapter of Ohalot, we have the following Mishnah. This is now, 1,000 plus years after the Torah. Midorot hagoyim, dwelling places where non-Jews have lived. You might, in the word Mador, hear the word dira, apartment, right? Ladur means to live somewhere. Tamein, we suspect that they are tameh. It's translated here as unclean, but we've been through that, so it doesn't mean unclean. We suspect that they might have what? What might we suspect be hanging out in a dwelling place of a non-Jew? Potentially an unburied body. Kama yishev b'tuchan v'yetzarich b'dika. How long does the non-Jew whose dwelling place you have gotten to have lived there, such that you need to check it? By the way, we're talking here about a non-Jewish town or neighborhood that has been conquered by Jewish people, and you're now going to be inhabiting it as Jews. You have to make sure that the place is kosher, but kosher here doesn't have to do with the dishes, it has to do with whether or not there's any tumah hanging out, any ghosts hanging out in the house. Arba'im yom. If you knew that a non-Jew lived there 40 days, afal pisha ein imo isha. Even if a man lived there alone without a woman. What's the implication? It's not what you think it is. The implication is, whether this has any historical evidence or not, that the Jews suspected that when non-Jewish women had miscarriages, which was very common, that rather than bring them out to the larger communal cemeteries, they would bury them in their own property, right? By the way, could have happened, right? That pregnancies were lost all the time back then. And the commentary in this says that even if there was no non-Jewish woman living in that house, meaning even though you don't have a suspicion that somehow women were having miscarriages there and they were buried in the property, you still have to suspect that there are non-Jewish dead bodies that might be in the property. You have to check it out. At Mahim Bodkim, Mishnah 8, what do they check? At Habibim, the drains and the pipes, Ha'amukim, V'et Hamayim Hasuchim, and foul-smelling waters, right? The idea is that before you're going to make this a Jewish inhabitants, you have to make sure that Jews can move in and not be concerned about becoming tamei simply by being in a place where there's a dead body. Reinforcing what rule that we saw from the Torah, non-Jewish bodies confer tum'ah, right? That, again, by the way, is a elevation of the status of a non-Jewish person, right? Even non-Jewish people confer the status of tum'ah. Look at the next one. This is from the Talmud tractate Yevamot, and we have a different understanding. A lone voice in rabbinic literature that says, no, I don't think the verses from Parshat Chukat that we read before apply to a non-Jew. Tanya, we learn in an earlier source. This is the second source on that page. B'chein haya Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, a very, very important sage from the era of the Mishnah, said, Kivrei goyim einan mitamin ba'ohel. That the graves of non-Jewish people do not confer tum'ah by means of a tent. Meaning, it's the case that if you are in the presence of a Jewish corpse and the same tenting is over both of you, that Jewish corpse confers tum'ah unto you. And we had thought up until now, based on the Torah and the Mishnah, that the same is true for non-Jews. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says no. And what's his proof text? Shinamar, because it says in a verse in the prophet Ezekiel, Va'atem tsoni, God is speaking to the Jews, you are my flock, Tson mariti, the sheep of my pasture, Adam atem, you are Adam, right? And what does Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai learn from that? Atem kruim Adam, you, my people, Jews, Hebrews, Israelites, you get the title Adam, even though the word Adam is the most ecumenical of words. Ve'ein hagoyim kruim Adam. And non-Jews are not called Adam. Why is that significant? If you go back to the first text, all of this has to do with Adam ki amut ba'ohel. When an Adam dies in a tent, then if you share that tent with that person, that tumah is conferred to you. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, based on Ezekiel, Adam only refers to us. The question that no one has the answer to is, what is he saying and why is he saying it? There are several possibilities. He could be speaking from a sort of racial, communal superiority complex. When the Torah refers to a human being, it refers to a full human being. Who are full human beings? Us. We, not them, right? And therefore, since we are the Adam and not they, then it is our dead bodies who confer this tumah, not theirs. Or he could be pushing for a leniency, not because he's moved by a particular value proposition, but he says there are a lot of places in the world where you might run into dead non-Jews. There are many more non-Jews than Jews. If we have to be concerned that at any place we go to that a non-Jew once lived, that there might be a non-Jewish person buried there, we won't be able to go anywhere. It's hard enough for us to figure out where to go where no Jews have died, right? We can't interview Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but the impact of his ruling is lenient. The feeling of his ruling is uncomfortable. The impact of his ruling is you have to be less concerned when you go into places, because if only non-Jews live there, all right, if they died, big deal. Not big deal that they died, but it doesn't have a non-Jewish body doesn't have ritual impact on me. That's a leniency. But the leniency is through the prism of saying, why? Because a non-Jewish body is halachically, legalistically, like the carcass of an animal, rather than like the corpse of a human being. A carcass of an animal does not render the same kind of impurity as a human corpse does.
It could
Sandra.
just be different. It doesn't necessarily have to render it as a carcass of an animal. It could simply be different.
Right. So what Sandra's saying is that it could be in between. That he's not saying since they're not like our corpses, they're like animals. Just be a different category, and that category is the category of a non-Jewish person whose death was probably sad, but it doesn't impact our ritual life. By the way, that's a very kind of normative thing to say that our laws affect us, and we're affected by the in the same way that we're not affected when we were waiting for a minyan, when Hector, whom we love as a member of our staff, when he walked into the room, he didn't affect us ritually. We couldn't do the service without him because he sets everything up, but because he's not of the covenant, there's nothing against him, he has a different faith, he doesn't impact our ritual life. This could be just a natural extension of that. The non-Jews with whom we live, they die. Their deaths don't impact us in the same way that Jewish deaths do, not because they're lesser, they just don't. It's a different thing. We don't know exactly what he meant. What we do know is that it makes us a little bit uncomfortable to imagine it. I want you to, we're going to read for a second this little story or remembrance by Rabbi Ethan Tucker, my dear friend and former chavruta, who's one of the founders of Machon Hadar, who was writing about this topic. Alan, do you want to read this into the microphone?
Years ago, I was privileged to share time in the Beit Midrash of the Jewish Theological Seminary with Rabbi Morris Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro had been a childhood prodigy at Yeshivat Chochmei Lublin in Poland. He was a Holocaust survivor who made it to America and served as a community rabbi. In his later years, he devoted his time to learning and to helping other beginning learners on their own journeys.
And I'll just interject that when I was in rabbinical school, Rabbi Shapiro was the rabbi of the Beit Midrash. He would just sit there, study all day, and he was able to be there to help you understand a text. He was a beautiful, gentle man.
In one of my many conversations with him, he spontaneously brought up this text of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. You know, he said, that text got me through the camps. Surprised, I asked him to elaborate. He explained that Rabbi Shimon's statement here had enabled him to see his Nazi persecutors as being animals, as being something less than people. He had to confront them as true human beings, he said, as moral agents who were nonetheless choosing to perpetrate this unspeakable evil. He would have lost all faith in God and humanity and would have been sapped of any will to survive.
Just pause for 1 second. It's just an unbelievable testimony, right? This is a tremendous scholar who knows the Talmud basically by heart, who was in the face of the most unspeakable evil that non-Jews could perpetrate on Jews. And this one, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai saying that the non-Jews are not religiously, ritually part of Adam, and that their corpses don't render us the same way tameh, which means that somehow they're of a lesser human level, which is a terrible thing to say about anyone, saved him. He couldn't have gotten through it had he not held on to that notion. Keep going.
It was precisely the dehumanization in this text that lifted up his own humanity and allowed him to live another day.
Right, as if he was saying to himself, then my goal is to live as high as possible as an Adam in the presence of those who've almost lost their status as Adam because of the way they're acting.
As if this analysis was not stunning enough, he then added, one of the things we learned from the Nazis is that it is forbidden to talk this way anymore. Rabbi Shimon's text for him was a one-off. It appeared at a critical moment for him and then was retired.
Meaning, don't use this as your way of understanding basic non-Jews in the world. And by the way, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai lived under the impression of Romans who were probably treating Jews not that dissimilar to the way Nazis were. So he came by, if his teaching was motivated by value and not just by law, he came by it honestly. And Rabbi Shapiro is saying, use it in a foxhole and then discard it. You do not want to live this way. Go ahead.
but the Nazis revealed how a dehumanizing text that might serve as an escape pod for the oppressed could easily turn into a gas chamber in the hands of the powerful.
So this is heavy stuff, and it begins with quote unquote, some archaic rules about using the ashes of the red heifer to bring yourself back from a status of impurity to purity. And what it gets down to is, who do we include in what categories? When do we claim a leniency because it makes life easier, even if that leniency is tied to a value that is uncomfortable to articulate? And sometimes a value which is uncomfortable to articulate in general situations can be a salvation to someone who needs some way to understand how a human being could act unhumanly, right? The Nazis were dehumanizing us and murdering us, and therefore, in some ways, reducing themselves from the status of being worthy of being called humans. And Rabbi Shapiro would have said, had a Nazi died in front of him and he shared a tent with him, he would have relied on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saying, this person lived, this person died. He confers no ritual change to me because he's right below that level. 1 second, Rosa, because there was a hand up over here. Rosemary? Let's give Rosemary the microphone.
What Ben Shimon says, it's more logical because right now we are living in a land here or in Middle East. We don't know who has lived there before. I mean, I was going to school. They started in one of the neighborhoods to dig to make the road. And they found a lot of bodies because years ago, I don't know when, there was a cemetery there. But people had built and lived there. So it's logical to accept that because if not, we can't live anywhere.
Right.
How do we know who was underground?
Right. And again, so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai might have just been a pragmatic rabbi issuing a lenient ruling to make life more livable, or he might have been trying to tell us something about how he understood non-Jews, or he was saying that to make the statement is not turn them into animals, it just creates a third ritual category, and to say that if you're in our covenant, your bodies impact us, and if you're not, it's not that we don't care about you, but your bodies don't impact us in the same way, right? That's less heavy, less laden down with what could be painful. Yes, Rosa. Will you give Rosa the microphone?
Nazis dehumanize us because it was easier for them to do their job if they didn't see us as humans. The commander of the Auschwitz concentration camp admitted to that. He said, making us look inhuman, treating us as human, just made it a whole lot easier to kill them because they didn't appear human anymore.
Well, I think it was both, Rosa, right? And without getting too deep into a discussion of the Shoah, I think it's both the case that since the society for a generation or more had convinced themselves that Jews were less than human, it actually created the raison d'etre for the Shoah, and then continuing to think of them as subhuman or as rat made it more easy for them to justify them. Yeah, of course. And in the process, Rabbi Shapiro is saying what the Nazis felt about us is really what they did to themselves because they lowered themselves from the status of humanity. Sandra.
Isn't it ironic that the Rabbi Shapiro, using the tools that the Nazis used to be able to annihilate us, allowed him to survive?
Yeah. It's
also dehumanized.
Yeah. There's a statement, I can't remember how to say it in Aramaic, that sometimes when a fellow rabbi hears a rabbi say it, it says, if I hadn't heard him say it, I never would have believed it, right? If you hadn't heard such a gentle, moral, extraordinary rabbi say this, you couldn't have imagined that he would say it, but once he said it, you have to reckon with it, because he wasn't saying it to make an impact. He was saying it because it was deep inside of him. Last comment, Bob, and then let's give Bob the microphone.
I would simply prefer to look at it as the covenant among the Jews, gives the Jews a special status among the community.
Yeah.
I know it's very tribal, but I prefer to look at it that way.
Yeah. Listen, I understand that. There are aspects of our tradition that are tribal, right? And there are expressions of tribalism that go over the top and become exclusionary and becomes triumphalist and it becomes murderous, right? There are expressions of tribalism that say, I live and I love and I care in concentric circles. I do care about I care about all you. I care about my family more. Sorry. right? And I care about all the people in this room, and I care about other people in other shuls, but I care about the people in this shul more. And I care about people who belong to different faiths in the city, but I care about the Jews in the city more. Like, there's something about tribalism which is very, very natural, right? And I therefore, and particularly when it comes to the ritual life of a community, it makes sense that we are impacted and moved by the presences of fellow travelers in our faith more, or at least differently, than those who are not. So there's the
Rab-
last two sources we'll just leave because
Rabbi,
Rabbi? Yes, Bible.
may I ask a quick question? I hope
Yeah.
it's quick. It may be anachronistic and it may just be that 7 is an important number, but is there any meaning in the fact that we mourn those closest to us, Shiva, with 7 days, and the full time after, in a sense, commemorating a life that one took in battle, doesn't stop at the 3 days, it's the 7 days? That to me is less tribal.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were right in the lead up to the question that we have certain iconic numbers in our tradition, and 7 is one of them. There are many reasons why Shiva is said at 7, including there are places in the Torah where there seemed to be a wailing for 7 days. There's also in halachic literature that that of the 7 days of Shiva, the days that are considered on a higher plane or more intense are the first 3 days. So it's not totally coincidental that to this day, as we think about our observance patterns, there's a 3-day period and a 7-day period. And when it talked about someone recovering from contact with a dead person, not their necessarily own loved one, there was a 3-day quarantine and then a longer 7-day quarantine. How all of that got thrown into a soup pot, and then it got born as ritual law over hundreds of years of cooking. And I agree with you that I don't think it's a coincidence that those numbers are the same. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, stuff to ponder and think about. We'll do Kaddish to Rabbanan, and then we'll go into Mariv and Shabbat together. Kaddish to Rabbanan in the Lev Shalem is on page 38. Okay, Kaddish to Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalmad yivrach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'yizman kari v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevorach leolam leomel maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh Yitadar, Yitale, Yitalal, Shemeda Kudusha, Brichu, Laela, Minko, Birchata, Bashirata, Tushbechata, Benechamata, Damiran, Behalma, Bimru, Amen. Al Yisrael, Vial Rabbanan, Vial Tamidehon, Vial Kol Tamidei Tamidehon, Vial Kol Man Daskin Beoraita, Di Viatra Hadain, Vidi Bechol Atar Viatar. Yehei lahon ulchon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin umzona ravicha uforkana min kodam avohon di v'shmaya v'yamru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Oseh shalom v'ramav u'v'rachamav yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Please rise for the Baruch for Mari, page 264 in the Lev Shalem.
והוא ההוא מכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה לשבע פה ולא יקל חמתו, אדוני שם מלך יעננו ויום קורנו. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. אל חי וקיים תמיד לא חלנו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המריב הרבים. אהבת
ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. ובאחותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם, משה ונשאו לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם. מי כמוך בנים אדוני מי כמוך נדבר קודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ובניך בקיים לפני משה זה אלינו ואמרו. אדוני מלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי פתנת יעקב גלום יד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. ברוך נא ביום ברוך נא השכיבנו אלוהינו. ושמור צאתנו ואוהנו לכם לשלום מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני שומר מישראל לעד. ברוך נא לעולם אמן ואמן. כי המלכות שלך חיל תמלא בכבוד, כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו. יגדל ויגדל שמי רבה, בעלמא דבר כי הוא תמליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון וחייכו בישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יש ברבה ברח לעולם והמיה, יתברך וישתפך ויתפאר ויתמם ויתנשא ויתהדר וידלה וידלה שמר קודשה בריחו לאל אמין ברוך אתה ושעתה תושבתה ונחמתה רמון בעלמא ואמרו אמן. Yitgadavi gadash ve'abba be'omadi v'akyuti v'amlich malchute b'chayechon u'vyomechon v'chayrocho be'Yisrael v'agla v'zman karivi mu'amen yesh ve'bavarach le'lama me'amaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitma v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitala v'yitala shemer gudisha b'richu le'ele min go b'chata v'shata tushbata v'nechmata devan v'amavimu amen.
We are seated Vihinoam, middle of 279 in Lev Shalem.
Orach yamim aspe'orei bishuati, orachin raspe'ehu, v'arehu bishuati.
Back to 216 in Lev Shalem for Atah Kadosh. Second paragraph.
Kadosh,
Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh, nice.
Kadosh, 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 Adat V'Velo Haaretz Vodoho. Vatisa eni ruach v'shma achar korash kadosh.
Baruch Adonai mimkomo.
Baruch Adonai mimkomo. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Titen em le'Yaakov chesed l'Avraham asher nishbata l'otenu mimei kedem. V'yivdechu v'chayre shemecha ki lo azavtu d'shecha Adonai Adonai chafetz l'man tzidko yagdil torah v'yadih.
Back to 280 for Kaddish Shalem.
Yitgada v'yigadash ve'abba be'amadi v'akyuti v'amich malchute b'chayechon u'vyomechon v'chayrocho be'Yisrael b'agala v'zman karivi mu
Amen. Yehi shemer b'amvorach
Yesh v'gavarach le'lama me'amaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitma v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitala v'yitala shemer gudisham Rehu le'ela min go b'chata v'shirata tushbata v'nachmata devan v'amavimu amen Titgabat Thorhon V'Achon D'Cho Yisrael Kadam D'Shmaya V'Imu Amen Yehi Shalom Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chaim Elenu V'Cho Yisrael V'Imu Amen Oseh Shalom Imamav Hu Yaseh Shalom Elenu V'Cho Yisrael V'Imu Amen.
We rise for Aleinu 281.
Aleinu L'Shabech L'Adon HaKol. V'ne'emar v'hayadonai l'melech kol ha'aretz v'yomahu yadonai echad u'shemo echad.
Kaddish Atom Mourner's Kaddish.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei v'chayechon u'yomechon u'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael Ba'agala u'izman kariv v'imu amen. Hey shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam elomei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yiporar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudisha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata damiran be'oma v'imu amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imu Amen. Oseh Shalom Imamav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imu Amen.
Asher Koach El. We'll do Havdalah. The candle is not standing by itself. If anybody wants to come hold the candle, I would be grateful. So I can't hold the candle and the Kiddush cup simultaneously. הנה אל ישועתי, אפתח ולא אבחר, כי עוזב זמרת יד, אדוני ויהי לי לישועה, ושבתם מים בששון, ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני הישועה, על עמך ברכתך סלע, Adonai Tzvaot imanu, miskav lanu, Elohei Yaakov Sela, Adonai Tzvaot, Ashrei Adam Boteach Ba, Adonai Yoshia, Hamelech Yaneinu B'yom Koreinu, La Yehudim Hayta Ora Vesimcha Besason V'Yekar Kein Tielanu. Sorry, Kos Yeshuot Esa Uv'Shem Adonai Ekra Yainanai Adonai Nai Yainanai Adonai Nai Baruch atah Mechalam Borei Pri Agafen, Baruch atah Mechalam Borei Minei Besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Mechalam Borei Miorei Ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Mechalam Avdil Ben Kodesh Kol Ben Ol Choshech Ben Yisrael Min Yom HaShlishi Mei HaMaseh. Baruch atah Adonai HaMavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. Masarem deal ben kodesh lecho chatoteinu imcho zareinu v'chaspeinu yarbe yarbe kacho v'kacho chavim balayla zareinu v'chaspeinu yarbe yarbe kacho v'kacho chavim balayla Shavua tov Shavua Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Shavua tov, everyone. Everyone's presence here was very significant. When we make exactly 10, everyone should feel very good about your decision to come. Come again next week. Shavua tov. Shavua tov.
Oh my gosh, that kind of happened to Daniel's Kiddush cup. How did this happen, though?
I don't know if it's like the wrong fit. I don't know what.
No. Look,
Hi, Tyrell. Oh, she just went off before we could. No, she didn't hear us. So anyway, okay. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, David.
What's up, Gary?
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow, Elise.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Papers? Yeah, I'll go recycle.
Still on there. I think it may be disconnected.
She's disconnected.
If anybody wants to take it home, take it home. There's something upstairs in the fridge. Take home bagels and stuff if you want.
He is disconnected. What? You want this?